Alright, so we're going to discuss in this video how to both load and deploy the new 4/8 load that we've been talking about. Essentially, it's a flat loaded hose with loops placed at the 4 and at the 8 loop. In this section, we're going to show you how to load the 4/8 load. Just a few guys are needed. If you show, we got one guy up on top of the truck, Rocky's there, and then Chris will be on this side, Johnny's on the other side. This only requires 3 people to load. Go ahead and show the hose. No presetting of the hose, no prior looping or turning of the hose. The hose can just be laid out and we're ready to load.
We've sped up this section of the video in order to save time. In this section you'll see 3 firefighters loading the 4/8 load. Because the 4/8 load is essentially just a flat load with loops created at the 4th and 8th fold, it's incredibly easy to load. On average, it's taken about a minute and a half to get a 150-foot crosslay back on the truck. Rocky, standing on top of the truck, is merely flaking the hose back and forth to the 2 other firefighters on either end of the crosslay. Each of the guys on the end of the crosslay is responsible for counting the folds and creating their loops at the 4th and 8th fold. The nozzle is placed in the center so that the hose line can be deployed from either side.
And so as you can see here, we have our 2 loops, one at the 4th flake and one at the 8th flake. And so to secure these, what we're going to do is, to clean it up, the appearance of it, we'll take our loops and tuck them in, and it just gives the entire thing a cleaner appearance. But the very obvious 2 flat areas can be deployed and pulled when it's time to deploy the hose line. So it gives it a nice clean appearance, and then we can just pull these out when it's time to deploy.
In this section, Rocky will demonstrate how to deploy the 4/8 load. As Rocky steps onto the truck, he places his arm through the 8 loop and grabs the 4 loop. It's important that it's done in this configuration. He reaches over with his left arm and grabs the nozzle. Rocky empties the entire crosslay onto the ground before advancing. As he moves away from the truck and towards the fire, he deploys the entire hose load. As you can see, the 8 loop is over his forearm still, and the 4 loop is in his hand. This is important because as he pulls the hose line away from the truck, he will feel tension in the 4 loop initially. So with it being in his hand, he can release it first and continue with the 8 loop over his forearm. If he only needs to extend that far, the 8 loop is essentially the working line and can be the last 50 feet of hose that he can flake at the door or is already set up for a forward advancement. Once Rocky is moved away from the truck, he can drop the 8 loop if needed and continue to advance the hose line. In this instance, he leaves the last 50 foot as working line, already deployed and ready for attack.
Alright, so in this section of the video, we're going to show how to deploy this as an alley pull. So if the truck was in a narrow area where we're unable to deploy the line straight off perpendicular to the truck, we can actually deploy these lines and lay it parallel to the truck using a 2-man hose deployment. So in this scenario, the company officer is going to grab one section of the hose, the firefighter is going to grab the other section and the nozzle, and he's going to deploy the hose line parallel to the truck. So firefighter is going to grab the 8 loop and the nozzle, while the company officer grabs the 2 loop, and then they go in opposite directions.
In this section, they will demonstrate the alley pull. Note that the company officer is holding onto the 4 loop, while the firefighter is holding onto the 8 loop and the nozzle. As they begin to deploy the hose line, they will empty the entire bed onto the floor before moving in their respective directions. The 4 loop goes to the front, while the 8 loop goes to the rear of the truck. The firefighter with the nozzle then returns with the hose line back to the center or whichever angle or direction he needs to go for fire attack.